When was the last time the person you love smiled because of you? Philip Grant asked himself that question the moment he saw his wife's vacation photo, and the answer shattered him, because her happiness didn't include him anymore. It was 2 in the morning when Philip Grant stood alone in his Virginia mansion, staring at a dinner plate wrapped in plastic. The note attached, written in his wife's elegant handwriting, read, "Waited for you." Again. The crystal chandelier above cast harsh light on the marble floors, on the mahogany shelves, lined with business awards, on the cold, untouched meal his wife had prepared hours ago. This sprawling estate, worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes, felt like a mausoleum, beautiful, silent, dead. Philip Grant was a billionaire, a CEO, a man the business world called a titan. But in that moment, surrounded by luxury he'd worked decades to build, he felt only emptiness. He loosened his tie, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, and pulled out his phone. 12 missed calls from his wife, Sonia. He'd meant to answer. He always meant to. But there was always one more meeting, one more deal, one more crisis that couldn't wait. Except now, standing in the hollow echo of his own home, Philip wondered if he'd waited too long. What he didn't know yet, what he couldn't possibly know, was that on the other side of the world, his wife had just made a decision that would change everything. And by the time he discovered what that decision was, it might already be too late to save what they had. But to understand how a marriage drowns, you have to watch it sink slowly, one missed moment at a time. And Philip and Sonia's drowning had started long before that fateful night. 7 years earlier, Philip Grant had been a different man. Not a billionaire yet, just a driven entrepreneur with a small tech startup, big dreams, and a heart that beat faster every time Sonia walked into a room. They'd met at a charity art gala in Richmond, him in a rented suit, her volunteering. As a guide, passionately explaining the stories behind each painting. She was a vibrant black woman with a laugh that seemed to light up every corner of the gallery, and Philip, raised in the reserved quiet of old money Virginia, found himself completely captivated. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. She came from a tight-knit community where love was loud, Sunday dinners that stretched for hours, church, choirs that shook the walls, family cookouts where everyone knew your name and your business. His family showed affection through trust funds and formal dinners, through expectations and silence. But somehow, impossibly, they fit. She taught him how to dance at her cousin's wedding, laughing as he stumbled through line dances he'd never heard of. He introduced her to his corporate circles, and she charmed every room she entered with a grace that made him proud to be the man standing beside her. In his tiny apartment, they'd cook simple meals together, talk until 3 in the morning, about everything and nothing, slow dance to jazz records with the lights turned low. He'd promised her then, holding her close in that cramped kitchen, "I'm going to build an amazing life for us, but I promise I'll always make time for you." And she believed him. God help her. She believed him. When he proposed at the art museum where they'd first met, she said yes without hesitation. They forever felt certain, unbreakable. But forever has a way of fracturing when you stop paying attention. Success came fast. Too fast, maybe. Philip's startup exploded into something bigger than he'd dreamed. Offices in Richmond, then New York, then overseas. Suddenly, he wasn't just an entrepreneur anymore. He was a CEO, a brand, a man with hundreds of employees depending on him, investors demanding results, competitors circling like sharks. The hours got longer. 5 a.m. starts, midnight finishes. Sometimes he'd come home and Sonia would be asleep on the couch, the TV, murmuring softly, a substitute for the conversation she'd hoped to have. He told himself he was doing it for her, for them, for the future they'd planned. He bought her a new car, sleek, expensive, everything she deserved. Designer jewelry appeared in velvet boxes with notes that said, "Thinking of you." And finally, the mansion, a sprawling Virginia estate with more rooms than 2 people could ever need, set on manicured grounds that looked like something from a magazine. To everyone watching, Philip Grant was the perfect husband, providing, successful, living the American dream. But inside those beautiful walls, Sonia was disappearing. She'd wait up for him, fighting exhaustion, just to share a few minutes of his night. But as months turned into years, even that small hope faded. She started falling asleep alone, the other side of the bed cold and empty. She'd cook his favorite meals, her mother's recipe for slow roasted chicken with herbs, and set the table with candles, hoping tonight would be different. One autumn evening, she waited on the patio under string lights, the food getting cold, checking her phone every few minutes. When he finally called at 10 p.m., another investor meeting running late, she forced understanding into her voice. But after she hung up, she sat alone at that candle-lit table and cried until the flames burned down to nothing. Philip never saw those tears. He came home near midnight to find the house dark and a wrapped plate waiting in the refrigerator. He ate standing up, scrolling through emails, and never noticed the lipstick stain on the wine, glass she'd left in the sink, or the mascara smudges on the tissue in the bathroom trash. Sonia stopped asking him to come home early, stopped planning surprise dinners, stopped hoping. Instead, she retreated into her art studio, the beautiful space Philip had built for her on the property, thinking it would make her happy. And in a way, it did, but not the way he'd imagined. Her paintings became confessions she couldn't speak aloud. In one, a lonely figure reached toward a shadowy silhouette walking away, always just out of touch. In another, two chairs sat side by side, one bathed in light, the other drowning in darkness. Philip walked past her studio almost every day and never stopped to look inside. The loneliness ate at her in small bites. The empty seat beside her at church on Sundays when Philip chose golf with colleagues instead. The art exhibition where her own painting hung on the gallery walls. And Philip sent an assistant with a check but never came himself. Her friends stopped asking where her husband was. They'd learned not to. And Sonia learned to smile and say he's working in a voice that betrayed nothing, even as something inside her withered a little more each time. One winter evening, after another week of sleeping alone in a king-sized bed that felt like an ocean, Sonia made a decision. She found Philip in his home office, laptop glowing in the dark, and said quietly but firmly, "We need time together. Real time, away from all of this." Philip looked up, startled by the steel in her voice. She suggested Italy, a dream she'd held onto since childhood, a chance to walk through history hand in hand with the man she'd married. To her surprise, he agreed. Actually, I seemed excited. They planned it together over stolen evenings, 2 weeks in Rome and Florence, a second honeymoon to remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Sonia let herself hope again, carefully, like touching a wound to see if it still hurt. But hope, she was learning, could be the cruelest thing. As their departure date approached, Philip's work exploded into crisis. An overseas deal was collapsing. A major investor was threatening to walk. He started staying at the office later and later, promising himself he'd fix everything before the trip. Sonia packed their suitcases alone, doubt growing with every folded shirt. The night before they were supposed to leave, Philip came home at 11, with guilt carved into every line of his face. "I can't go," he said, the words crushing the air from the room. "Just for a few days. I'll catch up, I promise." Sonia felt something break inside her chest, something that had been cracking for years finally giving way. But she didn't cry, didn't fight. She was too tired for that. Instead, she said quietly, "I'll go with Aisha then," her best friend, who'd planned to join them halfway through. Philip drove them to Dulles International Airport the next morning. The ride was silent except for GPS directions. At the terminal, he hugged Sonia tight and kissed her forehead. "Have fun for both of us. I'll be there in a few days." She nodded, not trusting her voice. As she walked into the airport, rolling her suitcase behind her, she didn't look back. And Philip, watching her disappear into the crowd, felt something twist in his gut, a warning he was too foolish to heed. Sonia's plane lifted off without him. As it climbed through the clouds, she stared out the window and thought about the man she'd married and the stranger she lived with now. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, 30,000 feet above the earth, Sonia Grant began to let go of her marriage. She just didn't know yet that Philip would only realize what he'd lost when he saw a photograph of her smiling, genuinely beautifully smiling, without her wedding ring, in the arms of another man. So, here's the question that will haunt the next chapter of this story. How do you win back a heart that's learned to beat without you? Can love survive when presence has been replaced by promises, and promises have all been broken? Stay with us, because what happens next will either save this marriage or destroy it forever. The message came at 3 in the morning. Just 5 words that would tear Philip Grant's world apart. She's not wearing her ring. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because before Philip saw that photograph, before his hands trembled over his phone screen in the darkness of his empty mansion, Sonia was halfway across the world, standing on a hotel balcony in Florence, holding her wedding ring up to the moonlight. And what she did next would change everything. Let me take you back to where the real breaking point began. Not in Virginia, not in some boardroom or corporate office, but in the warm golden light of Italy, where Sonia Grant was learning a dangerous truth that she could be happy without her husband. The moment Sonia stepped off the plane in Rome, something shifted in the air around her. Or maybe it shifted inside her. The Mediterranean warmth wrapped around her shoulders like an embrace she hadn't felt in years, and as the taxi wound through streets lined with ancient architecture, buildings that had stood for thousands of years while empires rose and fell, she felt impossibly small and somehow paradoxically free. Aisha squeezed her hand in the back seat. "You okay?" her best friend asked, reading the mixture of emotions playing across Sonia's face. Sonia nodded, but tears pricked at her eyes. Because she was okay, that was the problem. She was supposed to be heartbroken, supposed to be missing Philip, so desperately that she couldn't enjoy a single moment without him. Instead, as Rome unfolded before her in terracotta and marble and bright bougainvillea, spilling over iron balconies, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: possibility. They spent their first day at the Colosseum, standing in the shadow of ancient arches where gladiators had once fought for their lives. The tour guide spoke about survival, about battles that determined fates, and Sonia found herself thinking about her own arena, the beautiful prison of her marriage, where she'd been fighting for Philip's attention for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without that constant, exhausting struggle. "He should be here," she whispered to Aisha, as they stood beneath the Sistine Chapel's painted ceiling. Later that afternoon, Michelangelo's masterpiece stretching overhead in impossible beauty. But even as she said it, the ache felt different, less sharp, more like the phantom pain of a limb that had already been severed. That evening, they ate gelato on the Spanish steps as the sun set in ribbons of orange and pink. Sonia laughed at something Aisha said, really laughed, the sound surprising even herself. And somewhere in that laughter, in the taste of pistachio gelato, and the warmth of strangers chatting around them in musical Italian, Sonia realized something terrifying. She was starting to remember who she'd been before she became Philip Grant's lonely wife. But the real transformation happened at the Trevi Fountain. Legend says, if you throw a coin into the Trevi Fountain, you'll return to Rome someday. Tourists crowded around the Baroque masterpiece, tossing coins over their shoulders, making wishes with closed eyes and hopeful hearts. Sonia stood at the edge, a single euro coin pressed between her palms, and closed her eyes. What do you wish for when your marriage is drowning but you still love the man pulling you under? What do you ask for when hope feels dangerous, but hopelessness feels like dying? Sonia made her wish, not for Philip to change, not for him to suddenly become the man she needed. Instead, she whispered to whatever gods might be listening, "Let my marriage heal. Please, let it heal. But if it can't," her voice broke, "if it can't, give me the strength to survive its ending. Give me the courage to choose myself." The coin arced through the air and splashed into the turquoise water, joining thousands of other wishes, other hopes, other desperate prayers. And as Sonia opened her eyes, she felt something release in her chest. Not quite acceptance, not quite surrender, but something closer to permission. Permission to stop waiting, permission to stop drowning, permission to swim toward shore, even if that meant swimming away from the man she'd vowed to love forever. That night in her hotel room, Sonia couldn't sleep. She stood on the small balcony overlooking Rome's glittering lights, and her phone buzzed with a text from Philip. "Hope you're having fun. Crazy day here. Love you." 5 words of affection after an entire day of silence. She stared at those words, "love you," and felt nothing but exhaustion. How many times had he said he loved her while choosing everything else first? How many "I love yous" were supposed to fill the space where his presence should have been? Love, she was learning, was supposed to be a verb, but Philip had turned it into an apology, a placeholder, an excuse. She didn't text back. Instead, she went inside, pulled her suitcase from the closet, and found the small velvet box where she'd packed her jewelry. Her engagement ring sparkled in the lamplight, the diamond Philip had saved for months to afford back when they were young and broke and happy. Her wedding band sat beside it, the inside engraved with their wedding date and the words, "Always yours." But was she? Was she still his when he'd abandoned her in every way that mattered? While Sonia stood in that Roman hotel room holding her rings, Philip Grant was 3,000 miles away, buried in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. His company's biggest deal was imploding. The investor had cold feet. His board was in crisis mode. And Philip, running on 4 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline, was trying to hold his empire together with nothing but force of will and PowerPoint presentations. "We need your decision now," his CFO pressed. "If we don't close this by Friday—" "I know," Philip snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. He rubbed his eyes, saw Sonia's face behind his closed lids, and felt guilt twist in his gut. He'd promised to call her tonight. What time was it in Italy? He checked his watch. Too late now. She'd be asleep. He'd call tomorrow. He always meant to call tomorrow. His phone sat on the conference table, dark and silent. He didn't know that on that same phone, buried in his social media apps, a photograph was about to upload that would shatter every assumption he'd made about his marriage. He didn't know that while he was choosing his company over his wife. For the 1,000th time, she was choosing herself for the first time. Sometimes the moment your life changes doesn't announce itself with trumpets and drama. Sometimes it happens quietly, in a hotel room 3,000 miles away, when the person you've taken for granted finally sets down the weight of loving you. The train to Florence cut through Tuscan countryside so beautiful it looked like a painting rolling. Hills dotted with cypress trees, vineyards stretching toward horizons bathed in golden light. Sonia pressed her face to the window and felt tears slide down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from something more complicated. Beauty, when you're heartbroken, feels like betrayal. The world shouldn't be this lovely when your life is falling apart. "You're not wearing your rings," Aisha said quietly, noticing Sonia's bare left hand resting on the armrest between them. Sonia looked down at her naked finger, at the pale band of skin where her rings had lived for 7 years. "No," she said simply. "I'm not." "Does Philip know?" "Not yet." Sonia's voice was steady, calm, maybe not ever. "They're in the hotel safe. I needed to feel what it's like, to not be his wife for a little while, to just be Sonia." Aisha reached over and squeezed her hand, the one without the rings, without the promises, without the weight of a marriage that had been dying in slow motion. "And how does it feel?" Sonia looked out at the Tuscan hills rushing past and whispered, "Like I can breathe again." Florence welcomed them with Renaissance splendor, the Duomo's terracotta dome rising above, medieval streets, the Arno River, reflecting centuries of art and history and human longing. And waiting at their hotel was Derek, Sonia's old college friend, with a warm hug and a smile that felt like coming home. Derek was everything Philip wasn't in that moment. Present, attentive, interested in Sonia's thoughts and feelings rather than distracted by the next crisis. He was a curator at a local gallery, and as he walked them through the Uffizi that afternoon, pointing out Botticelli's Birth, of Venus and Caravaggio's dramatic shadows, Sonia felt something in her chest unfurl that had been clenched tight for years. "You haven't changed," Derek said, catching her transfixed expression in front of a painting. Still light up around art, the same way you did in college. Sonia blushed, realizing she couldn't remember the last time Philip had noticed how her face changed when she was happy. I'd forgotten, she admitted quietly, that I used to be like this. They spent the day wandering Florence's cobblestone streets, Derek sharing stories about the art and architecture with the passion of someone who'd devoted his life to beauty. And Sonia, walking between him and Aisha, felt herself becoming visible again. Not Philip's wife, not the lonely woman dining alone in a mansion. Just Sonia, the woman who loved art and conversation and gelato in the afternoon sun. But it was that evening, as they walked across the Ponte Vecchio at sunset, that Sonia finally said the truth out loud. The Arno River flowed beneath them, golden in the dying light, and Florence spread out on either side in medieval beauty. Derek had fallen back to take a phone call, leaving Sonia and Aisha alone at the bridge's center, surrounded by jewelry shops and tourists and the soft murmur of a city settling into evening. He was supposed to be here, Sonia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands gripped the ancient stone railing, as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. With me. This was supposed to be our second honeymoon, our chance to fall in love again. I know, honey. Aisha's arm slipped around her shoulders. But I'm not even angry anymore, Aisha. That's what scares me. Sonia turned to face her friend, tears streaming down her cheeks now. I'm just tired. So tired of being an afterthought, of coming second to every meeting, every deal, every crisis that somehow matters more than I do. Have you told him this? I've told him 1,000 times, with words, with tears, with silence. And nothing changes. He apologizes, sends flowers, promises it'll be different, and then... She gestured helplessly at the empty space beside her where Philip should have been standing. Then I'm alone again. And I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, loving someone who forgets I exist. Derek rejoined them, sensing the heavy mood but tactfully staying quiet. They walked in silence for a while, crossing to the other side of the bridge where small restaurants spilled tables onto the street and the smell of pasta and wine drifted on the warm air. Can I tell you something? Sonia said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the narrow street. Both Aisha and Derek turned to her. Last night, I took off my wedding rings, and this morning, when I got dressed, I left them in the hotel safe. And the strangest thing is, she held up her bare left hand, examining it in the lamplight, as if seeing it for the first time. I don't miss them. I thought I would, thought I'd feel naked or wrong without them. But instead, I just feel lighter. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Aisha's eyes widened. Derek, who didn't know Philip but was starting to piece together the shape of Sonia's pain, looked at her with something like understanding. I don't know if my marriage is over, Sonia continued, her voice gaining strength. But I know I can't keep breaking myself trying to save it alone. I deserve to be chosen, not just provided for, not just send expensive gifts and apology texts, but actually chosen. Every day. The way I've been choosing him for years, and in that moment, standing on a Florence Street corner with her wedding rings locked, away and her heart finally speaking the truth, Sonia Grant made a decision. She wasn't giving up on her marriage yet, but she was giving up on being invisible. Whatever happened next, whether Philip woke up in time or whether this was the beginning of the end, she would no longer sacrifice herself on the altar of his ambition. The next morning it dawned bright and impossibly blue. Derek suggested a day trip to a vineyard in the Tuscan hills, a friend's family estate where they could escape the tourist crowds and breathe countryside air. Sonia agreed immediately. She'd spent 7 years suffocating in a mansion. She wanted to remember what freedom tasted like. They drove through landscapes that looked photoshopped, too perfect to be real, with their manicured vineyards, and ancient olive groves, medieval stone farmhouses perched on hills that had watched centuries pass. Sonia sat in the passenger seat with the window down, warm wind tangling her hair, and she felt something dangerous rising in her chest, joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy that had nothing to do with Philip or their marriage or any of the pain she'd been carrying. Just the simple pleasure of being alive in a beautiful place with people who actually wanted her company. The vineyard was everything she'd dreamed Italy could be. They picnicked on a blanket beneath an old oak tree, surrounded by rows of grapevines heavy with fruit. The wine was rich and earthy. The food, fresh bread, local cheese, sun-ripened tomatoes, tasted like summer itself. And the conversation flowed easy and natural, the way it does when no one's checking their phone or thinking about the next meeting or mentally half gone. Derek told stories about the art world's absurdities. Aisha shared gossip from back home, and Sonia laughed, really laughed. The kind of laughter that comes from your belly and leaves you breathless. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Certainly not in recent memory with Philip. This, Derek said at one point, gesturing at the golden landscape around them, is what life should feel like. Present, connected, real. Sonia looked at him, at Aisha, at the Tuscan countryside spreading away in every direction, and thought, he's right, this is what I've been missing. Not just Philip's presence, but the feeling of being truly alive. The afternoon light turned magical as it always does in Tuscany, that golden, our photographers dream about, where everything glows from within. They were laughing about something. Derek's arm casually draped around Sonia's shoulders. As they sat side by side on the picnic blanket, when Aisha pulled out her phone. "Wait, hold still," she called out. "This light is gorgeous. Let me get a picture." It was such an innocent moment. The kind of vacation photo thousands of people take every day. Derek and Sonia sitting together, glasses of wine in hand, genuine smiles on their faces. The Tuscan countryside stretching behind them in layers of green and gold. Sonia's left hand resting naturally on the blanket beside her, reaching for a piece of bread. Her bare left hand, without her wedding rings. The camera clicked. Aisha checked the photo and grinned. "Perfect, you both look so happy." And they did. Sonia glowing with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Derek's friendly arm around her shoulders. The whole scene radiating the kind of carefree joy that speaks of people enjoying life together. "Send it to me," Sonia said, still laughing at whatever joke they'd been sharing. "I want to remember this day." Aisha nodded, already uploading it to social media with a caption about Tuscan magic and living our best lives. It was thoughtless, automatic, the kind of thing people do 100 times a day without considering the consequences. None of them could have known that in a few hours, 3,000 miles away, a man named Philip Grant would see that photograph and have his entire world collapse in the space of a heartbeat. But before we get to that moment, the moment that changes everything, we need to understand what Philip had been telling himself while Sonia discovered her freedom in Italy. He'd been drowning in work, just as he'd predicted. The deal was still falling apart. His board was breathing down his neck. He'd been in back-to-back meetings for 3 days straight, surviving on coffee and adrenaline and the absolute conviction that once he got through this crisis, he'd make everything right with Sonia. He'd called her twice, but the time difference made it difficult. Their conversations were brief and polite, the kind of surface-level exchanges that revealed nothing about what was really happening beneath. Sonia said she was having a nice time. Philip said he missed her. They both said "I love you" and meant it, but the words felt hollow, echoes in a canyon, fading before they reached the other side. Philip told himself she understood. That was what he'd been telling himself for years, wasn't it? That Sonia understood his drive, his ambition, his need to build something that would secure their future. That she'd always be there, waiting, constant as a lighthouse while he navigated stormy seas. It never occurred to him that lighthouses can be shut off, that waiting has an expiration date, that understanding can curdle into resentment and then, worst of all, into indifference. On the third night of Sonia's trip, Philip finally wrapped up a marathon session with his board. The deal was saved, or at least temporarily resuscitated. He drove home at 11 p.m., bon-tiered, but feeling that familiar rush of accomplishment. He'd done it, pulled his company back from the brink, proven, once again, that Philip Grant could handle anything thrown at him. The mansion was dark and empty when he arrived, as it had been for days. As it had been, if he was honest, for years. But tonight, The silence felt different, heavier, more accusatory. He poured himself a scotch, loosened his tie, and sank into the leather chair in his study. He missed Sonia. Actually, genuinely missed her in a way that felt physical, an ache in his chest that the scotch couldn't numb. When had he last really talked to her? Not just the "how was your day" exchanges, but real conversation, the kind they used to have in his tiny apartment when they were young and broke and deeply in love. Guilt gnawed at him, so he did what millions of people do when they're feeling disconnected. He opened social media, searching for evidence of his wife's life that he'd been too busy to witness firsthand. And that's when he saw it. The photograph loaded slowly. His mansion's Wi-Fi was acting up, but even in pixels and fragments, Philip could see enough to make his heart start racing. Sonia, in golden sunlight, laughing. When was the last time he'd seen her laugh like that? Really laugh, with her whole face, her eyes crinkled at the corners. Her smile so wide, it looked like joy might spill right out of her. The image finished loading, and Philip's breath caught in his throat. His wife sat on a picnic blanket in what looked like a vineyard, Tuscan hills rolling away behind her in postcard perfection. A man Philip didn't recognize sat beside her, tall, good-looking, his arm casually draped around Sonia's shoulders. They both held wine glasses. Both looked happy, comfortable, the way couples look when they fit together naturally. But that wasn't what made Philip's hands start trembling. It was Sonia's left hand, resting on the picnic blanket, bare, completely bare. Her wedding ring, the ring he'd saved for months to afford, the ring she'd worn every single day for 7 years, was gone. And his wife, ringless and radiant, was leaning into another man's embrace with a smile Philip hadn't seen directed at him in years. The scotch glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the carpet with a dull thud. Amber liquid spread across the Persian rug, but Philip didn't notice. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the photograph, from his wife's happiness, from her bare finger, from the impossible reality staring at him from his phone screen. Sonia had taken off her wedding ring. His wife, his loyal, patient, understanding wife, had removed the symbol of their marriage and was letting another man hold her while she smiled like she'd been set free from a prison. Jealousy hit him first, white-hot and irrational, making his chest tight and his vision narrow. Who was this man? Why was he touching her? Why did Sonia look at him with such easy affection? But underneath the jealousy, something far more terrifying was rising. The slow, creeping realization that he might have already lost her. Not to this man, necessarily, but to his own neglect, to years of broken promises and missed dinners, and "I'll be there soon" texts that never materialized into actual presence. To every time he'd chosen his company over his wife and told himself she'd understand, that she'd always be there, that love meant she'd wait forever. How do you measure the exact moment when someone stops waiting? When patience turns to resignation, turns to emptiness, turns to the courage to take off. Your wedding ring, and remember who you were before you became someone's afterthought. Philip stared at that photograph until his eyes burned, trying to decode every detail. Where was she? Who was this man? How long had she been without her ring? But the questions that really terrified him were simpler and more devastating. Did she still love him? Or had he waited too long to notice her slipping away? His hands were shaking when he pressed the call button. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Philip?" Sonia's voice came through, confused. "It's the middle of the night here. What's wrong?" "I saw a photo of you," he said, his voice coming out strangled and wrong. "You're not wearing your ring." Silence. The kind of silence that stretches across an ocean and across years of accumulated hurt. "No," Sonia said finally, her voice very quiet. "I'm not." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Philip felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, and her answer would determine whether he fell. Another long pause. He could hear her breathing, hear the rustle of sheets as she sat up in whatever hotel bed she was sleeping in, 3,000 miles away from him. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of pain that made his chest ache. "Because wearing it every day while feeling so alone was breaking my heart," Philip. The words hit him like a physical blow. Sonia, Let me finish. Her voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. I needed to remember who I am without it. Even if just for a little while. I needed to feel what it's like to not be Philip Grant's wife. To just be Sonia. You're still my wife, he said desperately. That photo with that man. His name is Derek. He's an old friend from college who happens to live in Florence. And yes, he's been kind to me, present, interested in what I have to say, all the things you haven't been for years. That's not fair, isn't it? Sonia's laugh was bitter. Philip, do you know what's not fair? Sitting alone at a dinner table you set for two, waiting for a husband who's always on his way but never arrives. Planning a vacation for months, packing both our suitcases, only to be told the night before that work is more important. Again, sleeping alone in a king-sized bed, and wondering if you remember you have a wife at all. Philip's throat tightened. I was providing for us, building a future. We already had a future. Her voice cracked. We had each other, and that was supposed to be enough. But you traded us for an empire, Philip. You chose success over presence, money over moments. And now, she paused, and he heard her breath catch. Now I don't know if there's anything left to save. Don't say that. Tears were running down his face now. Please, Sonia, I love you. I know I've been an idiot. I know I've taken you for granted. But seeing that photo, seeing you without your ring, seeing you happy, without me, it made me realize what I've been too blind to see. I'm losing you. I've been losing you for years. And I don't know how to... It shouldn't take seeing me with someone else for you to worry about losing me, Philip. Her voice was exhausted now. Defeated. That's the problem. You didn't notice me disappearing when it was just the two of us. You only saw it when another man was in the picture. What does that say about our marriage? The question hung between them, unanswerable and damning. Sonia, please. His voice broke. Give me a chance to fix this. Let me prove that I can change. That I will change. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was so tired it scared him. I don't know if I can believe that anymore. I've heard I'll change before. After every missed dinner, every broken promise, every time you chose work over me. And nothing ever actually changed. This is different. Is it? Or are you just scared because for once you're not in control? Because I've finally stopped waiting and started living? She paused. I need to go, Philip. It's late here. When are you coming home? Panic edged into his voice. In a few days. We can talk then, but... She hesitated. Don't expect me to come back the same woman who left. That woman died a little more every day you ignored her. This version of me, the one without the ring, the one who can laugh again, she, is not going to disappear just because you finally decided to pay attention. Sonia. Goodbye, Philip. The line went dead. Philip sat in his study, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to emptiness. When he finally lowered it, his hands were trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. She'd said goodbye. Not good night or talk tomorrow. Goodbye. Like an ending. In Florence, Sonia sat on the edge of her hotel bed, her phone dark in her lap, tears streaming silently down her face. Her hands shook as she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together all the pieces that felt like they were breaking apart. Aisha emerged from the bathroom, took one look at Sonia's face, and sat beside her without a word, pulling her into a hug. Sonia collapsed into her friend's shoulder and sobbed, for the marriage she'd tried so hard to save, for the man she still loved despite everything, for the woman she'd been who'd accepted crumbs and called it a feast. He saw the photo. Sonia whispered into Aisha's shoulder. He called about the ring. What did you tell him? The truth. That I can't do this anymore. That I'm tired of being invisible. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. And you know what the worst part is? I could hear in his voice that he was finally scared. Finally realizing what he's been throwing away. But it took me taking off my ring and being photographed with another man for him to care. Not years of me begging for his attention. Not me crying alone in our mansion. It took the threat of losing me to someone else. What are you going to do? Sonia looked at her bare left hand, at the pale line where her rings had been. I don't know. I love him, Aisha. I still love him so much it hurts, but love isn't supposed to feel like drowning, and I don't know if he can actually change, or if he's just scared in this moment, and will go back to the same patterns once he thinks he has me secure again. Back in Virginia, Philip sat in his study until dawn, staring at that photograph. Dissecting every detail like it held the key to saving his marriage. The way Sonia leaned slightly away from Derek, maintaining distance even as his arm rested on her shoulders. That meant something, didn't it? She wasn't in love with this man. The smile on her face wasn't romantic. It was relief, freedom, joy at being seen and valued. The realization was crushing. Another man hadn't stolen his wife's happiness. Philip had simply stopped providing it. And Sonia, starving for attention and affection, had finally allowed herself to accept it from someone else, not romantically, but simply as a reminder that she deserved to be treated like she mattered. He'd done this. Not Derek, not Italy, not circumstances or bad timing, or the demands of running a company. Philip had systematically, day after day, chosen everything over Sonia. And now, staring at the evidence of her happiness without him, he understood the devastating truth. She didn't need him anymore. She'd learned to be happy on her own. The question was, could he become the man she needed before she decided she preferred life without him? Sonia's flight landed at Dulles International Airport on a grey Thursday afternoon. She'd spent the last few days of her trip in a daze, going through the motions of sightseeing, while her mind churned over the conversation with Philip. Part of her wanted to believe he meant it this time, that seeing her without her ring had truly woken him up. But years of disappointment had taught her to protect her heart. Her rings were back in their velvet box in her carry-on, but they weren't on her finger. That felt significant, like she was bringing them home but hadn't decided yet if she'd wear them again. As she walked through customs, her heart pounded with anxiety. Would Philip be at the airport? Part of her hoped he would be. Part of her hoped he wouldn't, that she'd have more time before facing him, before having to navigate whatever came next. But as she emerged into the arrivals area, she saw him immediately. Philip stood near the exit, looking haggard in a way she'd never seen before. His normally crisp appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, hair, uncombed, dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. When their eyes met across the crowded terminal, something flickered across his face. Fear, remorse, desperate hope. He approached slowly, like she might bolt if he moved too fast. "Hi," he said softly. "Welcome home." Sonia's throat tightened. "Hi, can I take your bag?" He reached for her suitcase, and she let him, too exhausted to refuse the small gesture. They walked to the car in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like fog. The drive home was excruciating. Philip kept glancing at her, opening his mouth like he wanted to speak, then closing it again. Sonia stared out the window, watching familiar Virginia landscape roll past, and felt like a stranger returning to a place that was no longer home. Finally, as they pulled into their driveway, Philip turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. "Sonia," he said, his voice rough. "I know I don't deserve it, but please, can we talk?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. The CEO, the titan, the man who commanded boardrooms with absolute confidence, looked scared, small, human. "Okay," she said quietly. "We can talk." They went inside, and the mansion felt different to Sonia now. Cold despite its beauty, empty despite its size. She set her bag down in the foyer and turned to face her husband, crossing her arms protectively across her chest. "I'm sorry," Philip said, the words tumbling out like he'd been holding them in for days. "God, Sonia, I'm so sorry. For everything. For years of everything. I've been a fool. I told myself I was building all of this for you, for us, but the truth is I was building it for me, for my ego, for some idea of success that meant nothing if it cost me you." Sonia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She'd heard apologies before. She needed more than words. Philip took a shaky breath and continued. When I saw that photo of you in Italy, without your ring, happy with someone else, even if he's just a friend, it felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out my heart. And then I realized that's how you felt for years. That's what I've been doing to you every single day, making you feel like you don't matter, like I've moved on without you, even though we're still married. Yes, Sonia whispered. That's exactly how it feels. I want to fix this, he said desperately. I know I can't undo the past. I can't give you back all those missed dinners, all those broken promises, all those nights you slept alone. But I can change. I will change. Starting now. Sonia shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I want to believe you, Philip. You don't know how much I want to believe you. But I can't survive another cycle of promises and disappointment. I can't. Her voice broke. I can't keep breaking my own heart, hoping you'll finally choose me. Then don't hope, Philip said, stepping closer. Watch. Let me prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Every single day. And if you fail, her voice was small, scared. If I let myself believe again, and you go back to your old patterns, I don't think I'll survive it, Philip. I don't think there will be anything left of me to put back together. Philip's hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to reach for her. Then I won't fail. I can't. Because a life without you isn't a life worth living, Sonia. All of this, he gestured at the mansion around them, means nothing if you're not in it. Less than nothing. Prove it, she said, her voice gaining strength. Don't tell me. Show me. Starting today. Starting right now. She looked down at her bare left hand. I'm not putting my rings back on until I believe it. Until I feel chosen, valued, loved the way I deserve to be loved. The challenge hung in the air between them. Philip understood what she was really saying. This was his last chance. Maybe his only chance. And jealous phone calls or grand declarations wouldn't be enough. He had to become a different man. The man he'd promised to be when he proposed to her at that art museum a lifetime ago. Okay, he said quietly. Then watch me. I'm going to spend every day earning your trust back, proving that you're my priority. Not my company, not my ego. You, Sonia searched his face, looking for any hint of the old Philip, the one who'd made promises he couldn't keep. But all she saw was desperate sincerity. It wasn't enough yet. But maybe, just maybe, it could be a beginning. I'm going to unpack, she said finally, and then I need space. To think, to breathe, to figure out what I want. Anything, Philip agreed immediately. Whatever you need. As Sonia carried her bag upstairs, Philip stood in the foyer of their empty mansion and made a vow. Not to Sonia, she'd heard his vows before, but to himself. He would prove that love was a choice you made every single day. That presence mattered more than presence. That being there was worth more than any business empire. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to his assistant. Clear my calendar for the next month. All meetings, all appointments, everything. Tell them it's a family emergency. Because it is, his company would survive. His board could manage. His deals would wait. But his marriage, the one thing that actually mattered, was hanging by a thread. And for the first time in years, Philip Grant chose his wife over everything else. The question was, would it be enough? Could daily actions heal years of daily neglect? Could consistency earn back trust that had been shattered promise by broken promise? Upstairs, Sonia stood in their bedroom, staring at the velvet box that held her wedding rings. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. One part of her wanted to put them back on, to choose hope, to believe this time would be different. The other part, the part that had learned to protect herself to survive, warned her to wait, to make him prove it first. So she closed the box without opening it and placed it in her drawer next to her heart. Both still there, both still his if he could earn them back, but neither freely given anymore, not until he showed her that love was more than a word. Philip had asked for a chance to prove himself. She'd given him that chance. But what neither of them knew yet was how hard it would be. How many Temptations he'd faced to slip back into old patterns, how many tests of his commitment would come, how much pain they'd both have to walk through before they could find their way back to each other. And the cruelest question of all, what if his best efforts still weren't enough? What if some wounds cut too deep to fully heal? What if 7 years of neglect had killed something in Sonia that even the most devoted attention couldn't resurrect? The answer would reveal itself in the days to come, in every choice Philip made, in every moment Sonia watched him, waiting to see if this change was real or just another performance driven by fear of loss. Their marriage stood at a crossroads. One path led to healing and renewal. The other led to an ending, painful but perhaps necessary, and neither of them knew which path they were on until they walked it together, one painful, hopeful step at a time. So, the question we're left with is this: can love be resurrected after it's been starved for years? Can trust be rebuilt after it's been shattered over and over again? And most importantly, is Philip Grant capable of becoming the man his wife needs him to be, not just for a day or a week, but for the rest of their lives? The answer lies ahead. And I promise you, what happens next will either restore your faith in second chances or break your heart completely. But seeing Sonia's ring back on her finger wouldn't be that simple. And the question that haunted Philip in those first painful days after her return was one that gnawed at him every waking moment. Had he waited too long to fight for the woman he loved? The airport reunion had been awkward, strained, nothing like the passionate embraces of their early years. Sonia walked through the arrival gate looking both beautiful and distant, her face carefully composed into polite neutrality. Philip stood there holding a bouquet of her favorite flowers, pale pink peonies, feeling foolish and desperate. When she reached him, she paused, looking at the flowers, then at his face. For a moment, he thought she might walk right past him. Instead, she took the bouquet with a quiet thank you that landed like a stone in his chest. No smile, no warmth, just courtesy extended to a stranger who happened to share her last name. The drive home stretched out in suffocating silence. Philip gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, searching for words that might bridge the chasm between them. Everything he thought to say sounded hollow in his mind before it could reach his lips. I'm sorry. Too small. I love you. She already knew that, and it hadn't been enough. I'll change. Empty words she'd probably stopped believing years ago. So he said nothing, and Sonia stared out the passenger window at the Virginia landscape. Rolling past, her hands folded in her lap, her left hand conspicuously bare. That night, they slept in the same bed for the first time in 2 weeks, but they might as well have been on different continents. Sonia turned on her side, facing away from him, her body language a clear wall. Philip lay on his back, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to her breathe. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, to whisper all the promises burning in his chest. But he knew better. Words had failed them. Only actions would matter now. The question was, would she stay long enough to see those actions, or had Italy already shown her what life could be like without him? Morning came with grey light filtering through their bedroom curtains. Philip woke before dawn, not because his phone was buzzing with urgent emails, but because anxiety had seized his chest and wouldn't let go. He slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Sonia, though part of him wondered if she'd been awake all along, lying still, lost in her own thoughts. Downstairs, he did something he hadn't done in years. He made breakfast. Not a quick protein shake grabbed on the way out the door, but actual breakfast. Scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, fresh fruit, orange juice squeezed by hand. His movements were clumsy. He'd forgotten where Sonia kept the good plates. Had to search 3 drawers for the cheese grater, but he persisted. When Sonia came downstairs an hour later, dressed in a simple sundress, her natural hair pulled back, she stopped in the kitchen doorway. Her eyes took in the set table, the food steaming on plates, Philip standing there in jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual tailored suit. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Breakfast," Philip said, and immediately felt stupid for stating the obvious. I wanted to make you breakfast." Sonia walked slowly to the table, looking at everything as if searching for a trap. She sat down, and Philip joined her, his heart hammering. They ate in near silence, the scrape of forks against plates unnaturally loud. Philip had imagined this moment differently, conversation flowing, maybe even a smile from her. Instead, there was only this careful, painful politeness. When Sonia finished, she stood, murmured another quiet thank you, and disappeared into her art studio. The door closed with a soft, final click. Philip sat alone at the table, surrounded by the ruins of his gesture, wondering how many breakfasts it would take to earn back what years of absence had destroyed. The days that followed established a new, uncomfortable routine. Philip had done what once seemed unthinkable. He'd called an emergency board meeting and announced he was taking an immediate, indefinite leave from daily operations. His CFO would handle urgent matters, but Philip was stepping back. The board members exchanged shocked glances. Some looked concerned. A few looked skeptical, as if waiting for him to change his mind. But Philip was resolute. He'd built an empire, yes, but he'd built it on the ashes of his marriage. And now it was time to see if anything could grow from those ashes. Being home felt strange at first, almost violating, as if he were trespassing in his own life. The house, which he'd barely seen in daylight for years, revealed itself to him in unfamiliar detail. He noticed things he'd never seen before, the way afternoon light slanted through, the windows in the living room, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floor, the garden Sonia tended, full of roses and herbs he couldn't name, the squeaky third step on the staircase, the distant sound of church bells from the chapel down the road every noon. This was the world Sonia had inhabited alone while he chased deals and board meetings in glass towers downtown. She moved through the house like a cautious deer, aware of his presence but maintaining distance. Some mornings she'd find him already in the kitchen with coffee made. Other times, he'd be reading on the porch when she emerged from her studio. He never pushed, never demanded her attention or time. He was simply there, consistently, visibly present in a way he hadn't been in years. But presence alone wasn't enough, and he could feel her measuring him. Watching, waiting for the moment he'd slip back into old patterns. The question haunting both of them was the same. How long would this last before the phone calls started again, before just one meeting turned into 12-hour days? The first real test came on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after Sonia's return. Philip was in the kitchen preparing lunch. He'd gotten better at it, following recipes Sonia's mother had texted him, when his phone erupted with calls. The CFO, the head of operations, 2 board members in succession. The Tokyo office was in crisis. A product launch had gone catastrophically wrong, a shipment delayed, a partner threatening to walk. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. His entire team was calling because they needed him, the way they'd always needed him. The CEO, the fixer, the man with the answers. Philip stared at the phone vibrating angrily on the counter. Every instinct screamed at him to answer, to take control, to solve the problem. His thumb hovered over the screen. From somewhere in the house, he could hear the faint sound of Sonia moving around upstairs. He thought about her bare ring finger, the pain in her voice on that call from Italy, the woman in that photograph, laughing and free with another man's arm around her shoulders. His hand tightened on the phone, and then he turned it off, completely off, not silenced, off. He set it face down on the counter and went back to making lunch, his hands shaking slightly, but his resolve iron solid. When Sonia came downstairs 20 minutes later, she saw the phone sitting dark and silent on the counter, saw Philip plating pasta with the careful attention of someone learning a new language. She didn't say anything, but he caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise? Hope? He couldn't tell. They ate lunch together on the patio, the warm Virginia sun on their faces, and for the first time since her return, Sonia spoke more than a few words. She told him about a painting she was working on, about the struggle to capture a particular shade of twilight. Philip listened, truly listened, asking questions and following up, the way he used to when they first fell in love, the way he should have been listening all along. That evening, when he finally turned his phone back on, it exploded with 47 missed calls and a flood of increasingly frantic messages. The crisis had resolved itself without him. The team had figured it out. The company hadn't collapsed. The world had kept spinning. And sitting across from him at dinner, Sonia wore an expression he hadn't seen in years, something soft, something almost like cautious belief. But belief, once shattered, doesn't return overnight, and Sonia had learned to protect herself from hope. She'd been disappointed too many times to trust easily. In the weeks that followed, she tested him in small, quiet ways. She'd mention a church service on Sunday morning and watch to see if he'd actually come or find an excuse. He came, sitting beside her in the pew, shaking hands with her friends afterwards, staying for the potluck lunch even when he clearly felt out of place among her community. She'd ask if he wanted to watch a movie some evening, half expecting him to glance at his laptop. He'd close the laptop, put it away in another room entirely, and settle beside her on the couch with his full attention. Still, the distance remained. They were polite roommates, not lovers. Not yet. Maybe not ever again. Philip could feel her holding back, and it killed him. But he understood. You don't earn back trust with a few gestures and expect everything to be fine. Trust is rebuilt the same way it's destroyed, slowly, through 1,000 small moments that accumulate into a truth. So he showed up, day after day, proving through his presence what his words could not. One Saturday morning in late June, Sonia announced she was going to visit her mother in Richmond for the day. Philip felt a flash of panic. Their time together was still so fragile and a whole. Day apart felt like it might break whatever tenuous connection they'd rebuilt. But he simply nodded and asked if she wanted him to come along. Sonia looked surprised, then thoughtful. Maybe next time, she said carefully. He kissed her forehead gently and told her to drive safely, and he meant it. He wasn't trying to control or cling. He was trying to respect her, something he'd failed to do when he assumed she'd always be waiting no matter how he treated her. While Sonia was gone, Philip wandered their house, truly seeing it for the first time in years. He found himself drawn to her art studio, that sacred space he'd barely entered, even when things were good between them. The door was slightly ajar, an invitation maybe, or just carelessness. He pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. The room smelled of paint and turpentine, of creativity and solitude. Canvases leaned against every wall, a gallery of Sonia's interior life he'd been too busy to witness. He walked from painting to painting, his chest tightening with each one. Here was a canvas showing a dinner table with one figure sitting alone, the other chair empty, painted in shades of blue and grey. Here was a woman reaching toward a man made of shadow, her hand extended into darkness. Here was a bedroom at night, one side of the bed occupied, the other cold and untouched. The paintings were beautiful and devastating, each one a window into the loneliness his wife had endured while he built his empire. How had he been so blind? These weren't just paintings. They were her silent screams, her wordless pleas for him to see her, to come home, to remember she existed. And he'd never even looked. But then, in the corner, he found something different. A newer canvas, still wet, the paint catching light. This one showed two figures, their forms abstract but recognizable. One reaching out, the other turning toward that reach. The colors were warmer, amber, gold, hesitant pink. It wasn't finished, but it spoke of possibility, of maybe. Philip stood in front of it for a long time, and when Sonia came home hours later, she found him there, sitting on the floor of her studio, surrounded by her paintings, tears on his face. She stood in the doorway, unsure. "Philip?" He looked up at her, not bothering to hide his tears. "I never looked," he said, his voice breaking. "All these years you were showing me, you were telling me, and I never looked." Sonia crossed the room slowly and sat beside him on the floor. For a long moment, they sat in silence among her paintings, the weight of lost years heavy between them. Finally she spoke, her voice soft and sad. "I stopped believing you'd ever see them. I stopped believing I mattered more than a conference call or a quarterly report. You matter more than everything," Philip said fiercely. "You are everything." I was just too much of a fool to understand that success means nothing if I lose you." Sonia looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for the lie, for the moment he'd check his phone or make an excuse. But Philip just held her gaze, steady and present, the man she'd fallen. In love, with finally visible beneath years of corporate armor. "I want to believe you," she whispered. "But Philip, I'm scared. I'm scared to trust this, to trust you, because if you go back to the way things were—" "I won't," he said. "But I know you can't believe that yet, so I'll keep showing you, however long it takes." She nodded slowly, and then, for the first time since Italy, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Just that, nothing more. But for Philip, feeling the weight of her head resting against him, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, it was everything. It was hope. From that day, something shifted. The walls didn't come down all at once. Sonia was still cautious, still guarded. But she began to let him in by degrees. She started sharing more of her, day over dinner, telling him stories about the piece she was working on or a funny encounter at the farmer's market. Philip treasured every word, every detail, storing them away like precious gems. He asked questions, remembered her answers, followed up days later. "Did that gallery ever call you back? How did your friend's daughter's recital go?" The small pieces of her life that he'd once dismissed as trivial now revealed themselves as the very texture of love, the everyday sharing that makes two people a unit instead of strangers. Sunday mornings became sacred. They'd dress for church together, and Philip would drive them to the small Baptist church where Sonia had worshipped alone for so long. At first, the congregation didn't know what to make of him, Sonia's mysterious husband who'd suddenly materialized. But Philip showed up week after week, shaking hands, learning names, staying for coffee hour, even volunteering to help set up chairs for the weekly Bible study. Sister Marlene, a formidable woman in her 70s who'd become a surrogate aunt to Sonia, pulled him aside one Sunday. "You hurt that girl," she said bluntly, not unkindly. "I watched her sit alone in that pew every week, waiting for you. You better not be playing games now." "No games," Philip said, meeting her eyes. "I'm here because I should have been here all along. I'm here because she deserves someone who shows up." Sister Marlene studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well then, welcome to the family. Don't mess it up again." He didn't plan to. Every day was a choice to prioritize Sonia, to put her first, and every day it got easier and felt more natural. Work emails still came, they always would, but he'd set strict boundaries. 2 hours in the morning to handle anything urgent, and then the rest of the day was theirs. His executive team had adapted. The company was fine. It turned out the world didn't need him as desperately as he'd believed, but Sonia did. She always had. Late one evening in mid-July, they were washing dishes together after dinner. A small ritual they'd fallen into, standing side by side at the sink, their movements synchronized. The kitchen window was open, letting in the sound of crickets and the smell of honeysuckle from the garden. Sonia handed Philip a plate to dry, and as he took it he noticed, his heart nearly stopped, she was wearing her wedding ring again. The engagement diamond and the simple gold band back on her left hand where they belonged. His hands froze mid-motion, the plate dripping soapy water. Sonia followed his gaze to her hand, and a small, almost shy smile curved her lips. "I put it back on this morning," she said quietly. Philip's vision blurred with tears. He set down the plate carefully and turned to face her, cupping her face in his still damp hands. "Sonia, I'm still scared," she admitted, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "But I see you trying. I see you here, every day, choosing me. And I want to choose us again. I want to believe we can have what we had before, what we should have had all along." Philip kissed her then, a kiss full of gratitude and promise and desperate relief. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice." She smiled, really smiled, the first genuine, full smile he'd seen since before she left for Italy. "You already started." That night, they made love for the first time in what felt like forever. And it was nothing like the distant, mechanical encounters of the previous years when they'd been together but separate. This was a reconnection, a rediscovery, tender and passionate and real. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the darkness, Sonia traced lazy patterns on Philip's chest. "Do you know what Derek asked me in Italy?" she said quietly. Philip tensed slightly at the name. "What?" "He asked if I was happy, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd been able to say yes." She paused, her fingers stilling. "But Philip, I'm starting to feel happy again. I'm starting to remember what it feels like to be us." He held her tighter, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "That's all I want. You, happy. Us, together." They fell asleep like that, intertwined, and for the first time in years, neither of them woke in the night feeling alone despite lying next to another person. They woke together, and when morning sun streamed through the windows, they greeted it as partners again. The weeks rolled into months, summer deepening into the lush heat of August. Philip and Sonia fell into new rhythms, building the marriage they should have had from the beginning. He took her on dates, real dates, planned and thoughtful. Dinner at the restaurant where they'd celebrated their first anniversary. A jazz concert under the stars where they danced slowly, swaying together as saxophones crooned. A pottery class where they laughed at their terrible attempts to shape clay, ending up covered in mud but happy. One afternoon, Philip took Sonia to the art museum where he'd proposed all those years ago. They stood in front of the same painting they'd admired that night, a Monet water lily scene, dreamy and impressionistic. Sonia slipped her hand into his, and he squeezed it gently. "Do you remember what you said when I asked you to marry me?" he asked softly. "I said yes before you even finished the question," she replied, smiling at the memory. "You trusted me with your heart," Philip said, turning to face her. "And I took that trust for granted. I thought you'd always be there, waiting. I learned the hardest way that love isn't something you earn once and keep forever. It's something you choose and protect and nurture every single day." Sonia's eyes glistened. "You're nurturing it now. I'll never stop," he promised. And this time, she believed him. In early September, with the Virginia air just beginning to hint at autumn, arrival, Philip presented Sonia with an envelope over breakfast. She opened it curiously, pulling out 2 airline tickets. Rome to Florence, departing in 3 weeks, returning 2 weeks later. The trip they'd planned, the trip he'd broken her heart over. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Our second honeymoon," Philip said, smiling nervously. "If you still want to go, if you'll trust me to actually get on the plane this time." Sonia stared at the tickets, emotions warring across her face. Happiness, apprehension, hope. Finally, she met his eyes. "Will you really come? No last-minute emergencies, no work crisis that only you can solve." "I'll really come," he said firmly. "I've already told the board I'll be unreachable. Everything's handled. The only crisis I care about is making sure I don't waste another minute of the life I get to share with you." Tears spilled down Sonia's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Then yes, I want to go. I want to see Italy with you, the way it should have been." The 3 weeks before their trip were filled with happy anticipation. They planned their itinerary together in the evenings, Sonia pulling up photos of the Amalfi Coast, Philip researching the best restaurants in Trastevere. They bought new luggage, practiced basic Italian phrases, giggled over the pronunciation. It felt young and fresh, like they were dating again. And in many ways, they were, rediscovering each other, falling in love again with intention and awareness. The night before their flight, they stood on the back porch of their Virginia home under a canopy of stars. The September air was cool and pleasant, crickets singing their twilight songs. Jazz music drifted from the open window behind them, a Coltrane ballad Sonia loved. Philip pulled her into his arms, and they began to slow dance right there on the porch. No audience but the moon and the stars. "Thank you," Philip murmured against her hair as they swayed. "For what?" "For giving me another chance. For not giving up on us even when I'd given up on myself." Sonia pulled back to look at him, her hands resting on his shoulders, her wedding ring catching starlight. "Thank you for making the most of that chance. For proving that people can change when they want to badly enough. I love you." he said, the words heavy with meaning earned through months of showing up, being present, choosing her over and over again. I love you too, she replied. And this time, those 3 words weren't hollow or routine. They were a truth rebuilt from ashes, stronger for having been tested and nearly lost. They danced until the song ended and another began, until the night deepened around them, until they finally went inside hand in hand, ready to face tomorrow together. And when tomorrow came, they would board a plane side by side, and Philip would keep his promise. No work calls, no emergencies. Just 2 weeks in Italy, living the dream they'd almost lost forever. But more than the trip, more than the grand gesture or romantic destination, what mattered was the journey they'd already taken, the hard, painful, beautiful work of rebuilding trust and rediscovering love. Philip Grant had been a billionaire CEO who had everything the world told him to want, and he'd nearly lost the only thing that actually mattered, the woman who'd chosen to share her life with him. He'd learned that success isn't measured in boardrooms or quarterly earnings, but in the warmth of your partner's smile when you walk through the door. That provision without presence is just abandonment in expensive wrapping. That the most important empire you can build is a marriage where both people feel seen, valued, and loved every single day. Some love stories end in disaster, a cautionary tale of what happens when we take each other for granted. But Philip and Sonia's story, though it came dangerously close to that ending, became instead a testament to redemption, a reminder that it's never too late to change course, to humble yourself, to fight for what matters. Their marriage didn't just survive, it was reborn, forged stronger in the fire of near loss and genuine transformation. Now, as dawn broke over their Virginia home on the day of their flight, Philip woke before the alarm. He looked over at Sonia sleeping peacefully beside him, her left hand resting on the pillow, wedding ring glinting in the early morning light. He smiled, his heart full of gratitude and fierce protectiveness. Never again would he let work, ambition, or anything else come between them. She was his priority, his partner, his home, and this time he wouldn't forget it. The question that had haunted him, had he waited too long to fight for the woman he loved, finally had its answer. The answer was almost, but not quite. He'd come terrifyingly close to losing everything that mattered, but Sonia's grace, combined with his genuine transformation, had given them a second chance. And second chances, they both now understood, were precious, rare gifts not to be squandered. Their story offers a mirror for all of us. How many of us are guilty of the same mistakes Philip made, choosing career over connection, believing that providing material comfort equals showing love, taking for granted the people who wait for us, who hope for us, who slowly break in silence while we chase achievements that will never hold us at night. How many relationships are quietly dying right now because someone is too busy to notice, too distracted to care, too convinced that success at work equals success at life? So here's the real question, the one you need to ask yourself right now. Who in your life have you been taking for granted? Whose texts do you leave unread for hours while you scroll through social media? Who have you promised I'll make more time for you without ever following through? Who sits across from you at dinner while you're mentally still at the office? Who is slowly removing their ring, metaphorically or literally, because they tired of being invisible to the person who promised to see them forever? Don't wait for a photograph from Italy to wake you up. Don't wait until your partner has 1 foot out the door to realize what you're losing. Don't let your story become a tragedy when it could be a triumph. The people we love don't need our money or our excuses. They need our presence, our attention, our consistent choice to show up even when it's inconvenient. Philip nearly lost Sonia forever. You still have time, but time, like second chances, runs out. So I'm asking you, what are you going to do about it? Who are you going to call, text, or sit down with today to say, I'm sorry I've been absent, and I'm choosing to change? Drop a comment below and tell me, has this story hit home for you? Have you been the Philip in someone's life, or the Sonia waiting for someone to finally see you? Share your story. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to make a change before it's too late. And if this story resonated with you, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs this wake-up call. You might just save a relationship that's silently falling apart. Love isn't a one-time choice. It's 1,000 small choices, made every day, to put someone else first. Don't learn that lesson the hard way. Learn it right now, from Philip and Sonia's story, and go fight for your own happily ever after before it's too late.